So we've got the two parts. As many of you are probably aware, we've got a new set of standards that basically govern how RTOs do things. And they're coming into play very, very soon, just around the corner in July. Unlike previous versions of the standards, a lot of it's the same, but these standards also have some new requirements in them. And one of them is some requirements around student well-being. So I just wanted to set the scene for today's conversation by just giving you a very brief overview of what these new requirements say about student well-being. So we'll very briefly unpack that, and then I'm going to turn off the slides and we're just going to go camera to camera and have a chat with Robbie about student well-being in vocational education, in RTOs, some of the strategies we can use. As I said, we don't have much of a plan here. I've got some questions that I would like to ask Robbie, but you might also have some questions also. So given the numbers that are here today, and I'm so impressed by the interest this has generated, and I must confess that I didn't promote it very well either. I think I sent out one email to our community a few weeks back. So I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your time with us today and your interest in such an important topic as well. But if you do have a question for Robbie, we'll try and make time for that question towards the end. And given the numbers, we may not get to everyone. So I'll just sort of pick and choose a couple of questions. So yeah, put it in the chat and I'll share that with Robbie towards the end of the session. So this is the wording. I'm going to start with the plain wording, direct copy and paste from the standards, and then I'll kind of unpack that into a little bit more of a plain English as I see it. Now, just remember, I'm new to these standards, just like you. I'm from the RTO. Well, I'm not coming to you from a, vet compliance expert perspective or anything like that. Excelia as an RTO, we're in the same situation as all of you. We get these new standards and we need to interpret them and try and come up with a common understanding of what it means. And I think conversations like what we're having today are a perfect way to do that. Talk to someone who's an expert in the field and get a bit of a perspective on that. But this is what the standards say. They say, the wellbeing needs of the vet student cohort are identified and strategies are put in place to support these needs. An RTO demonstrates that it identifies, by reference to the training product content, the wellbeing needs of the vet student cohort and appropriate wellbeing support services. And B, it advises the vet student cohort of the availability of wellbeing support services and any organisation students can contact or additional action students can take to support their wellbeing. So as always, it's written in that, typical legalese. It's kind of a long, fluffy sentences that probably need a little bit of unpacking. So I've broken it down here in a little bit more of a simplified way. So the first point is that we need to identify the wellbeing needs of our vet student cohort. We need to put strategies in place to support these needs. When it comes to regulatory activity, like when, ASQA come in and check to make sure we're doing this, it says that the RTO needs to demonstrate, and I've kind of made some of these points here bold. Firstly, that it identifies the wellbeing needs of the students and it identifies appropriate wellbeing support services. And the second part of that was that the RTO advises students of the availability of wellbeing support services and any organisation that students can contact or additional action students can take to support their wellbeing. So that's pretty much it. But there's one bit that I've left out here, and I kind of, at first glance, I struggled to understand what it might mean, but then with a little bit of further research, I think I've come up with a fairly reasonable understanding of it. They use this term by reference to the training product. So the wording is the RTO identifies by reference to the training product content the wellbeing needs of the vet student cohort and appropriate wellbeing support services. So I think this means how might the training itself, the content of the training, impact student wellbeing. So some examples of that could be, does the course deal with sensitive or potentially confronting topics like a healthcare setting, community services, mental health, domestic violence, suicide, drug. So if your course content covers this sort of thing and exposes students to these sorts of situations, either in role plays or practicals or work placements, you need to consider how that might increase the risk. It could be, I guess, stressful or high risk training as well. So things like working from heights or in confined spaces with hazardous materials. Inherently that kind of training might cause stress or challenges or risk for students in terms of their wellbeing. And it's also worth considering as well the actual, not just the content, but the delivery methods used. So if you're doing a lot of online training, there can be isolation and overwhelm. And if you've got students going off to workplaces to do work placements, you need to watch out for things like harassment and bullying in the workplace. What sort of things are we doing to manage those sorts of situations? So that's my kind of unpacking of what we mean by reference to the training product. And if you have any additional thoughts, our audience, on that, then feel free to put it into the chat. It's always good that we share and try and come up with a common understanding of some of these parts of the wording that maybe don't make so much sense. Now, this is something that is a resource ASCO have put together. It's like a draft practice guide. There's some suggestions on there. I'm not sure it adds a huge amount of additional information to what the standards already say, but it's something that might be useful to you anyway. So I'm just going to pop a link to that in the chat. Bring that in there now. That's a link to the draft practice guide. So if you're in an RTO, you're a compliance manager or a trainer and assessor, and you want to understand from the regulator's perspective what they might be looking at, that link will hopefully help you there. So I just saw someone in the chat, Lisa, you've asked, will the PowerPoints be available? Yes, we always put the recordings up and the PowerPoints and any other resources as well. So that's it from me. I've done my little presentation to set the scene. Okay, so we now know that there's some standards that are going to come out that will require RTOs to look at their wellbeing practices. And now I'd like to bring Robbie into the conversation. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing and a bit of an introduction to Robbie for you. It's wonderful, actually. I actually had a couple of emails from people who actually know of Robbie's work in the sector, who said, "Oh my God, you've got Robbie Lloyd, Dr. Robbie Lloyd coming onto the to your webinar, and I can't make it. I'm really disappointed. I met Robbie at this thing or that thing, or we've worked together on this thing." And so, yeah, you're obviously very well known and respected. A bit of an overview, Robbie has over 40 years in health and human services reform, education and training, learner-centered alternatives, as well as specialising in promoting difference and diversity, Indigenous self-development, disability empowerment, and person-centered and community building mental health. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I've a question for you. What can RTOs do to effectively identify the wellbeing needs of their students?
I think the same thing that I've been saying as a lecturer in education in universities for primary and secondary trainee teachers for decades, which is the same for what we might call a trainer in a classroom. It's not that you're a trainer in a classroom or a teacher in a classroom. It's not that you're a teacher or a trainer in a school or an RTO. You're a member of the community, just like the people you're hoping to share learning with. So relationships are what build good learning. And I think when people feel comfortable and they know that you are seeking a genuine relationship with them, learning will really flow. And so I like to be a bit cheeky about all that and say, everything we do should be fun and funky. If people know that you're keen on a relationship, not that you just want to chat and, waste time, but that you genuinely care about where the students are coming from, that will be the beginning of a great wellbeing foundation. And then you can talk in more detail if people have particular challenges, but relationship is always my great foundation.
Wonderful. I love that. And I think I hope that educators, teachers, trainers also feel the same, or can work towards aligning themselves with that same concept, that it is very much student wellbeing it comes from the heart. It comes from a place of genuinely wanting our students to do well and to be well. When we talk about some of the stuff that I just mentioned, we've got these standards coming in, and we start to think about, oh gosh, I've got the regulator that's going to come and look at me for how I comply. And so with compliance comes this push to start to proceduralize everything and process everything. Is there a risk that we can maybe suck the life out of our wellbeing practices by over proceduralizing it? What can we do to make sure that we still keep that kind of that culture, that what you've just said?
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying.
well,
I'm probably
sure. And I think if we look at the three classic parts of the standards, 2.1, 2.6, and 3.1, they can all be interpreted mechanistically, but they can also just be seen as tools which guide the educator as to how to create an environment, or in the famous words of the film The Castle, it's the vibe, Your Honour. If the vibe is warm and friendly, people will feel welcome. If they've got anxiety about their own challenges or the context in which they're working, or if they're working in RTOs and they've got learners who are challenged, I think creating a friendly vibe and then knowing that you are making a clear statement that you're there to be empathetic with people's lived experience. Once people know that you value their lived experience, whatever it is, all their differences and diversity, that will create a relaxed environment. But you can still tick the boxes of 2.1, 2.6, and 3.1 and say, yep, we've got appropriate things happening about acknowledging students' needs in the wellbeing space. We've got appropriate advice if people need deeper help. And we've also got appropriate professional development for our team. For anyone who doesn't feel that they're well enough trauma informed, or they're not familiar with drug and alcohol issues, or the acute end of mental health issues, what I call when someone might have a SPAC attack. I've got 5 adult children and 4 grandchildren and a great-grandchild, and I've got a family full of mental health and drug and alcohol challenges. So I like to lighten the whole conversation. And so this is just life, shit happens. And so if someone has a SPAC attack, they're having a bad hair day, we need to be able to remain open, remain empathetic, be practical, but caring. And then those people can know, those learners can know that they're not a threat, they're not being judged, and they can learn to relax. So as educators, our job is to be there for those learners.
You mentioned professional development there. What are some things that educators, or even the people in the leadership team of the RTO, could do to become better informed if they're sort of looking at this for the first time and going, oh, gee, I actually don't know anything about this stuff. I'm a bit daunted by it.
Sure.
I found mental health first aid really, really helpful for myself.
Yep, that's one beginning. I'm a bit of a critic, have been from its initiation, that it was a little bit too taxonomic for me, a bit too much about labeling and not enough about empowering educators to know how to relate to someone when they're unwell. So I do a lot of work in community at the moment, creating a drop-in centre network around Sydney, encouraging communities to open up to their neighbours of whatever kind, all different faiths, all different ages, all different challenges. And we train volunteers in trauma-informed care. That's the beginning, so that they can know how to spot the signs of trauma, because probably at least half the population are traumatized by one thing or another. And that will lead to other behaviors. It could lead to addictive gambling. It could lead to substance use. It could lead to mental health blowouts, whatever it may be. If you've got a trauma-informed base for all your team, then they're forewarned to know about the signs. And I guarantee that in their own friends and family network, all this stuff is sitting there. Whether or not the family and friends network are in denial about it, most people know that it's sitting there among the people they already know.
What can we do? I love the idea. I like to believe that most people have the willingness to try and build wellbeing support into their own practice, to engage in their own professional development, to do all these things naturally as a want, as a desire, as part of their professional work as an educator. But what can we do to kind of, if we have people in our organisation who aren't so willing, or who maybe, is there a way that we can kind of build the culture of wanting to support student wellbeing in an organisation, in an RTO?
Well, I certainly hope so. If RTOs are following adult learning principles, then the very first one is value the learner and value the context in which they're living. If you're not doing that, then you're kidding yourself that you're not really a serious RTO. So I've got they're not tricks, they're results of my own research over decades, that these aspects are what really trigger people feeling more comfortable, not just to share their vulnerability, but to sit with their vulnerability and go on learning. And so one is conversation, that you are conversational. You're not just empathetic, you're actually encouraging a two-way exchange with your students. That leads to relationship building, a sense of trust and comfort for both parties. For you as perhaps a nervous educator, first time you've done it with people who are vulnerable, but you've begun a conversation, that's the beginning of a relationship. Next is to exercise your own imagination and encourage your learners to use their imagination. Create some scenarios where you say, imagine blah, 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 or can you tell me something where you've imagined? Or to have creativity invited into the space is one of the most healing experiences people can have. And then exercising discernment so that you ask the group, well, what do you guys think about that? Is that a wise way to go, or could we do it better? Or what's the group consensus? So you're inviting wisdom to come out of the group, and immediately people feel respected, that you're showing interest in their perspective. These are all adult learning principles that we're simply magnifying their wellbeing outcome. And the other two that I have absolutely been reinforced, especially with my work with First Nations people, never leave out the importance of mystery and wonder. The universe is full of mystery. The universe is full of wonder. And when we lose those two things, it's so bloody boring. But if we invite them into the space, oh, that's a mystery. I wonder how that works. It's simply as simple as that. People begin to open up and new learning happens and creativity flows. All these things are what I summarize as fun and funky.
That's great. Thank you for bringing a bit of mystery and wonder into our world, Robbie. I don't know if this is a thing we can do or should do, or how it works. Can we measure our success in supporting student wellbeing in an RTO? And if so, how do we do that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the definitions of wellbeing that I've heard in the sort of formal RTO world is that wellbeing is an outcome of whatever we try to do as educators. And the outcome would be that people are confident in a state to realize their own abilities and strengths. So to evaluate that, it's very much what we might call qualitative research, that when you do your feedback from the students themselves, you're finding out from them, how are you feeling? Has this experience been empowering for you? Has it been uplifting? Not just about we're trying to transfer skills here, but we're trying to help you feel in a way about yourself that's different from when you came into this experience. So you're certainly, hopefully, going to be in a state to realize your own abilities and strengths. But I find that a little bit too mechanistically functional only. I'm interested in literally, how are you feeling spiritually? How are you feeling socially? How is your spiritual and social and emotional well-being at the end of this experience? If you've bonded with the group, if you've overcome shyness, if you've been a bit funny, if you've been fun and funky, all of those things are great signs that good learning is happening, and you will be remembering so much more of this than if you were just mechanistically following a didactic set of items.
Okay. We've talked a fair bit about what the trainers are doing or educators are doing in the classroom or wherever they train, in the front line with the students. What in these sessions, we often have RTO leadership, compliance managers that are, I guess, going to be tasked with the job of making sure that they comply with these wellbeing requirements, but also do it not just because they have to, because they want to. What are some things that RTO leadership can do to foster this culture of wellbeing in their RTO?
Well, this is going to sound like a paid political advertisement, but I just want you all to know in the audience how much I regard Paul's pedagogy. So I'm an old school teacher, and I started teaching without any training as a teacher in 1972 at Christian Brothers St Mary's Cathedral in Sydney, and I learnt on the run. But what I've learnt is exactly what Paul showed me, which is if you care about the learner and you come from where they're coming from, they will really progress. And for an online learning company like Accelio to really celebrate each of the people who are out there in the ether hoping to get help in learning, for them to feel acknowledged and valued as who they are, I think management of RTOs really need to learn this, and so do school principals, because they've gone so far down that NAPLAN HSC worshipping track, as have universities. They've lost contact with the learner. But if adult principles are applied and people feel valued, they feel encouraged to relate to the group, and their lived experience is in the foreground of what's happening, then learning will really happen well, and an RTO that builds that sort of culture will thrive. Hence, so many people online today for your workshop, Paul.
Thanks, Robbie. I'd like to open it up to the audience now. If you do have any questions about student wellbeing in the vet space, please put them up, and I will shortly just go back through, because there's been a huge amount of chit chat going on there, and I might have missed some things. But just while we're doing that, I would love to give a shout out to Port Macquarie's School of Hard Knocks Choir. Do you want to tell us briefly about that, Robbie? It's slightly left of field, but I think it's still relevant.
Yes, well, many of you may know the wonderful Jonathan Welch, who started the School of Hard Knocks Choir, a very long time ago now, probably 25 years ago. And back in 2016, shortly after I'd started with what was then Port Macquarie Community College, now Mid-North Coast Community College. And I was in Melbourne at the Community Colleges Conference with the then boss, Val Evans. Jonathan Welch was one of the speakers. And I said to Val, let's go and ask Jonathan whether we could try our own School of Hard Knocks Choir in Port Macquarie and invite all sorts of people to come and sing. And so we fronted Jonathan. Turned out he loves Port Macquarie. He loves to come and perform his particular type of music at the Glass House concert venue here. And so within about a year, we'd started up a choir, and it is thriving now. Tim Madron from High Five, some of you might remember his own youthful performing career. He's still a wonderful performer. And Matt Booker, his mate, the brilliant guitarist and multi-talented musician. Every Tuesday morning, the choir meets. It's people with all sorts of psychosocial, physical disability, disadvantage. They come to the choir and rehearse for a couple of hours every Tuesday. They have a meal afterwards, and there's great social bonding. Many people come with their carers. They roll their wheelchairs into what has been the local scout hall. Right today, it's a polling booth for the election. But that is a place of great community celebration. And regularly we have concerts in the area where the guys all roll up and sing their repertoire. And it's a celebration of difference and diversity that's so heartwarming. And because Tim and Matt are so fun and funky, they help everybody celebrate, and they have little feature solos from the group all through the concerts, not just one group singing all the time. So it's a way of valuing each individual, but also celebrating the group and the community.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Robbie.
And feel free to go to the GoFundMe page if any of you would like to help us, because we've had a funding challenge and we're fundraising at the moment.
Well, yeah, your attendance here today, everybody has supported us to create a small donation to the School of Hard Knocks Choir, to thank Robbie for coming along today. Just a couple of notes from the chat here. So just a few things that people have said. Neha said that, yes, empathy and building relationships is the key. Molly and a couple of other people have shouted out to your amazing green glasses, Robbie. Naomi says the frontline staff are at the forefront of this exposure. Student services is the engine room that engages a lot with our learners. All staff need to be in that whole mindset. Mental health first aid is also helpful for staff. And Carmen says it's an interesting topic. In assessment creation, we'll need to include info on where to seek assistance if some topics trigger issues, for example, domestic violence, work-related harassments, etc. Karen says, for us, the lecturers are the frontline staff, the staff who interact with the students the most, sometimes dealing with mental health concerns within a session of 25 or more students. I hear that come up a lot, is that, you know, as we build relationships with our students in a course, often that's the trainer that's the first point of contact that a student might open up to about some kind of issues going on at home. Sometimes they might be quite serious issues. So I think that mental health first aid training, I know you have been somewhat critical of it, Robbie, but probably is a good first port of call for trainers to understand more about how to respond to someone disclosing a situation like that. Feel free to jump in at any point, Robbie.
I'll just say a couple of things there.
Yep.
They're very good comments, guys, and I'll tell you the story of when I first arrived at the college. They weren't involved so much in this field, but I came from the Northern Territory, where I'd had the privilege of working on the Kids Matter National Mental Health Program, which began in 2006 as part of the National Mental Health Program. This is whole school culture of wellbeing approaches that were run in 100 pilot schools, and I worked at Living Waters Lutheran Primary School in Alice Springs and was the coordinator of that. So when I came to Port Macquarie, I said to the guys, look, everyone from the cleaner to the gardener to the front desk people, they've all got to have the same training. We are here for holistic social and emotional well-being, and also we add unconditional positive regard. We are there to support everyone, and we have a saying in our special assistance high school where we get a lot of scratchy kids who get kicked out of mainstream school because of their trauma. We're not there to tell them what to do, shape them in ways that they have found inappropriate in mainstream schooling. We're there to love them, but we will guide them. And our policy is, you're welcome to go for it here, but don't be a dickhead. Learn your own restraint like we do in families. And as my wonderful mentor, Father Hank Nunn, the Canadian Jesuit who set up Atma Shakti Vidyalaya in Bangalore in India, a schizophrenia live-in therapeutic community. Mental illness is no excuse for bad behaviour. And I've got two sons who are in this same bracket. We love each other, but we also know where the boundaries are. And this is just like a good educator. And so I think whole organisational cultures of wellbeing are where we need to start.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Robbie. And look at all the wonderful reactions you're getting to that. That's really good. Someone's asked if you're on LinkedIn. You're pretty active on LinkedIn, aren't you, Robbie?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm there.
Yeah, cool. Maybe I'll send out a link to, if that's appropriate, to Nicolette, who's asked if you're on LinkedIn. But I'm sure you can look him up. Christina has asked, is trauma-informed training easy to access? For example, are there organisations that deliver this for staff?
It varies. I'd be cautious about, buying into expensive programs. It is possible to do not a lightweight version of it, but it's possible to have an approach that is scanning the major issues and then using the experience in the room to deepen the engagement with the culture that's in your context. So if you live in a particularly multicultural community that may be predominantly Islamic background or predominantly Asian, or refugee community, you're going to have a whole lot of sharper end issues in trauma than in many mainstream environments. So I'd be looking to customize. I'm happy to give people input about that on the whatever process we follow up with if they need more detail.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. Marilyn has asked, what can we do when the organisation does not recognise the awfulness of online delivery for so many students? The result is students who don't complete units, which cost many dollars to the organisation.
Yeah. Look, I think I'm probably known as a bit of a disruptor in this industry because I can't stand mechanistic vet, but I would be challenging management. So look at these standards. Look what's expected. What are you doing about that? Whether or not you're an online or a face-to-face or a mixed provider, you need to take responsibility for the well-being of your learners. And if you're not doing it, you're kidding yourself. Challenge them like that. I think in a way it's good that the standards have spelt it out because it's put it out in the public conversation, and management need to face up to this. And maybe some of them are coming from their own trauma, which is why they're in denial, just like so many families live with denial about gambling, about alcoholism, about domestic violence, all these issues that are across our society. Many people adopt the same process that Australia has taken as a nation in our relation to First People, which is when in doubt, deny. You've got to break through that denial, guys, even if sometimes, as has happened to me a number of times, you pay a price immediately, but you feel much better about yourself.
Thank you. Karen says, I'd love to hear more about leadership and governance, please. How could the leadership team create and support a wellbeing culture? Does it start with the student at the top or with the lecturers at the top because of the flow down effect?
Well, I can tell you that we just had at the beginning of the year a whole college event for the Mid-North Coast Community College. Everyone. We have the board, the staff, the admin, the cleaners. Everybody spent a day. We had to do some rotating shifts so we could still person the phones and everything. But everybody's present, and we use case studies. We have personal stories. Everyone's sharing. There's an openness to vulnerability. If management aren't prepared to go there, if they want to kid themselves that this stuff is about hierarchical, linear domination, they're really on the way out, because the world of AI and the world of social media will make irrelevant people who aren't coming truly from the heart, because people will know and they'll just dodge it and they'll avoid it, as you've said. So openness and vulnerability, everyone in the room together, sharing about that is a great way to strengthen culture across organisations.
Nice. And thanks for that question, which prompted that excellent response. Rian has said, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly, even online, I believe trainers and assessors can reach out to students with authenticity, respect, kindness, and empathy, one-to-one meetings, phone calls, and emails, ensuring the conversation is individualized and tailored to their need. And Molly says, I agree, Rian, less automation and more connection. And I agree with that too. Simone says, go Port Macquarie. Okay, I'm sort of trying to curate some of these questions here. Noah says, what evidence could an RTO submit to ASQA to prove they're complying with a wellbeing standard?
Well, the easy peasy one is get your students to provide feedback immediately. They can do it just on their phone. They can do it, with a questionnaire. But if they're happy and you record that, that's an evidence base that is worth gold. And if you're doing your job properly and the learners are thriving because they feel heard, maybe they've struggled with some of the detail that they have to pick up. It doesn't matter. If the vibe is right and they're engaged and you get that research collected, that will be acknowledged by the regulators, because we have been troublemakers in this space, both in school education and in vet for many, many years. But often the auditors or their bosses come around and say, thank God you guys showed the way. Wellbeing is what has been missing, both in schools and in vet. And we now know that the only way to do it is to take risks. Trust the learner.
Yep. Thank you.
Which is what Paul does. Thank God.
Thank you. There's been a few questions that have kind of said the same sort of thing, and I suspect part of this will be it kind of opens up a bigger picture that maybe training like mental health first aid or other sorts of programs is probably more appropriate to address. But in general, there's been a few questions about how do we identify when students have wellbeing issues or situations going on. So maybe, I don't know, you take that wherever you want.
Sure. Well, we all know, you can get two types of students, that the ones that are prominent who act out, what I call the bad hair dayers or the spack attackers. In a way, they're very healthy because it's coming out. As homeopathy teaches, if it's on the way up, it's on the way out. And that is a healthy sign as long as the educator is responding empathetically and guiding the process, not being judgmental or trying to shut down and shame that person. The other one, which is more difficult, are the super shy, quiet, withdrawing types. And often this comes from depression and anxiety, or they're traumatized by violence. Something's happened in their immediate situation or their recent past, which has led to this kind of vulnerability. And I think being prepared to step aside in a quiet moment, which can happen online as easily as it can face-to-face. If you identify people who you sense have got a problem, always follow your intuition and have a means of being able to follow up with people. Invite them to write to you, whether through the chat or email or whatever, or you approach them. If when you've been looking at assessment material, if you've had indications of vulnerability that could be a worry, then always follow through. And I think people will never feel that you're invading their privacy if you're coming from a caring place. They will always respond in a way that is ultimately, appreciative, even if they're nervous and reluctant to begin with.
There's been a couple of questions about this sort of general concept. I'm reading from Alison's question here, but it captures, I think, the essence of several other questions from the audience. How can RTOs look after the well-being of trainers? So, having trainers on the front line dealing with this stuff on a regular basis, what can they do to support their trainers?
Absolutely. Well, this is where Kids Matter is the great exemplar. So when I first came to the college, I said, where's the wellbeing team? Everyone should have a wellbeing team that meets at least every week, sometimes every day. And certainly in our special assistance high schools, the wellbeing team meets every single day. And it can include everyone from the admin front desk person, management, trainers, anyone can come to the wellbeing team. You have a core of people who are watching what I call the frequent flyers, people who are regularly vulnerable and we know they've got ongoing problems and they need support, including staff. And so the wellbeing team is a group that represents the discerning wisdom of the organisation in an unconditionally positive regard way to care for the social and emotional well-being of everyone, of the learners and the management and the staff and the community. So if you're talking schools, you're talking parents and friends. If you're talking mental health, drug and alcohol, you're talking consumers and carers, whatever the rhetoric is, a wellbeing team approach, meeting minimally every week, maximally every day, is a debriefing environment. It's where educators can come and ask for help. I'm not coping. I'm finding this class too much. I'm breaking down myself. I need backup. And particular learners can be supported there. It's not about picking on people. It's about unconditional positive regard in action. And that always ends up with, in the school sense, I used to say, who's going home with this one? In other words, who's going to go and visit that person, follow up with them to make sure that they know we care and that we've heard that there's an issue here and they need support.
Thank you. This might be our last question, I think. This has kind of come up in a few different ways, and we kind of touched on it earlier, but I want to ask it again because I think it's an important one. Can you give some advice? I'm reading from Colleen's question here. Can you give some advice on how to connect with students who are really closed off and prefer not to be fun and funky in the classroom?
Yep. I think, well, the two ways that I would do that, they're all intuitive. Number one, buddy them up with someone who you intuit could be a good mix, whether of a similar nature or a complementary nature, to get them involved in interactive. If you're breaking up into Zoom chat rooms, or if you're face-to-face, you're going into small focus groups, whatever. Buddy up those reluctant sharers with people who can help them on a smaller scale to feel more comfortable. And secondly, line up a one-on-one connection with you as the educator to ask questions about how they're traveling, what's going on. Has the learning been a particular challenge because of the content, or is it raising issues from their own life? To be able to go, not invasively, but just in a caring way, to follow up with them.
Thanks, Robbie. I just want to nod to Noah, who have said what about trainers' wellbeing? And I know we've kind of talked about that, so we might not answer that one. But why isn't that referred to in the standards? I think the main agenda here is the regulator is focused purely on outcomes for students. But I think it's, as we've discussed, it is very, very much good practice to ensure wellbeing for all in the organisation, using some of the strategies that have been discussed today.
Standard 3.1 is very much about effective continuous professional development of staff, which includes this issue of wellbeing. So an RTO has a responsibility to provide it, and if it's not happening, rattle the tree. Say, when's it coming? When are we going to see it?
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll leave it here because there's been lots and lots of really great questions. The point of today was, it's such a dynamic space. It's not something that we can create a one-size-fits-all approach or proceduralize or do the cookie cutter or anything like that. The idea of today was to really start this conversation, to also help inform everybody of what these new standards require in terms of wellbeing, but to start this conversation. And I couldn't think of anyone better than to have you here today with us, Robbie. And once again, I really thank you also for making the time, right before your appointment, and you've got other stuff going on, and it's just so wonderful that you still were able to join us through the wonders of technology.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you all. Good luck.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Robbie. All the best. And thank you to all of you for making the time to come along today. I really appreciate it. We do have certificates of attendance to all who have attended for the majority of the session today as well. So they'll come within 1 week. Thank you so much. And
thanks. All the best.